All right, so I'm going to talk today about community-driven API lifecycle, but I could tell by Mehdi's introduction that people are used to what I normally talk about, which is, I spend a lot of time. Wow, I look really fat in that picture. So I spent the last 5 years studying APIs, and even though I study the technology of APIs, I'm a developer. I look at more of the business of APIs, and more recently what I consider the politics of APIs. And what I'm going to talk about today is what I consider a community-driven API lifecycle, but it's probably not the one that you're used to talking about when it comes to reaching out to developers. I'm talking about the next tier of API ecosystem operations and bringing in other service providers to help you run your API throughout your API lifecycle. So bear with me, and I'll walk you through what I do. So this is me. I work for startups all the way up to the White House, the US government, helping them with API strategy. It may not look like me, but that was the last haircut I had. And, but I work on the good side of the federal government. I don't work for the NSA. I work for Obama, or I did. So similar to Mike Amundsen, I'm a big storyteller, so that's my role in the space, is to tell stories. And so what I'm going to do today is tell you my story, because it's the one I know best, but it'll help you understand where I think the space is going, because this is what I do, is try to understand where the space is going, and I try to model my own world after that. So let's go back to 2010. In July of 2010, when I started API Evangelist, I didn't want to use WordPress, because as a programmer and developer, WordPress is a pain in the ass for me. So I started an API, and basically /blog, and I created my own UI on top of my blog API. Along the way, I needed a few more resources. I was tracking on the business of API, so I was looking at what API providers like 3Scale, Mushape, Apigee were doing. So I needed a service provider resource to be able to track on the details and what they were up to. So I added another endpoint. My stack is pretty crude, pretty basic. Because I do a lot of government work, I just chose the pretty basic LAMP stack. And I run everything on Amazon, so basically it's an EC2 instance, an RDS MySQL backend, PHP, Apache. Nothing really fancy. I try to keep it pretty simple, because a lot of my work I open source and I give to governments and organizations to use. So I don't want it to be anything too groundbreaking. Started tracking on open source tools along the way. I added a tools endpoint. I started needing to be able to track on other resources that weren't blog posts, weren't companies, weren't tools, just links to research papers, other things that I was tracking on. So I added a links endpoint. As I was going through the space, I was like, well, I'm gonna curate news sources, research papers, and create a kind of weekly update of news. So I called this my curated API, which really was a kind of part of my links API. So I was tracking on links, I was kind of curating some of them for the week, and I was publishing them out as kind of a weekly roundup. Then, I noticed that, 2-3 years into it, a lot of companies come and go. They get acquired, they run out of money, and the companies that I was covering were disappearing. So I created another extension of my links tool, which I called LinkRot. And basically it spidered every page on my site, spidered the DOM, little JavaScript library, checked all the links, and checked them every night to see if there was a 404 or one was missing. And every time it did that, it took a screenshot of the page. And so in theory, when a link would disappear on my website, rather than when you clicked on it, rather than go into a 404, it'd pop up an image of what used to be there. Doesn't always work, but that's the theory. So I was taking these screenshots, so I created a screenshot API. And then I started tracking on interesting people in the space. Beyond service providers, beyond APIs, just looking at the people who are doing interesting things in the companies they work for. So I created a companies API, people API. And then if you ever read my blog, I'm really big on these little black and white images. I tend to create a lot of my images. Manfred had one of mine in the beginning of a slide. So I have a pretty interesting library of images that I've created over 5 years of doing API Evangelist. And then along the way, I started adding things to my image API. I started resizing, cropping, adding filters. Basically, all the features Instagram has, I have an API stack for that. And I apply filters, I create line drawings, I take pictures as I travel the world, and I generate images for those that weave into my storytelling. And then along the way, I just created a whole bunch of other utility APIs I will not go into, but syncing, backup, file conversion, all kinds of things you could think of. Because I'm a programmer, I can build it all myself. And along the way, I was like, well, I need to open up this to the public. I'm an API evangelist. I have APIs. I should probably open it up for other people to use. And I thought, what better way than to use one of the service providers I talk about? So I went through all of them and ultimately ended up working with 3Scale because at the time, it was the only one that had a freemium option, and I don't have a lot of money. So I went with 3Scale. But in the end, they had all the features I needed to manage my APIs. And I launched a portal using 3Scale, and I just kept building APIs. I got a whole bunch of them. And pretty much ended up with a pretty messy backend. Because I'm the only guy in there, I can add a table, add fields, do anything I want. No one's going to question it. And to be honest, I ended up with a pretty messy MySQL backend, to be honest. But you wouldn't know it because some of my APIs are fairly clean. But it was an API mess. Really, I just kept on adding endpoints. I really didn't have any method to the madness. I just needed an endpoint. I created it. I started using it. And so I really needed to start making sense of all this, because what happened along the way is it was pretty much an architectural failure, to be honest. So I had the one EC2 front end that all my APIs were on. So if I ran a big job, screen capture or image resize or anything, it would bring all of my APIs to a slow crawl. And if I rebooted the server, everything rebooted. So it was pretty much an architectural failure. I mean, I'm an old IT manager, so I know what I was doing. And honestly, not many people depend on my APIs but me. So it was just all right the way it was. And I just kind of kept plowing forward. And then along the way, I discovered a format, an API definition format called Swagger. If you're not familiar, Swagger just allows you to programmatically, in a machine-readable way, define your APIs using JSON. And so I started defining all my APIs like this because I wanted the documentation. Everyone who starts using Swagger thinks Swagger is the documentation. But Swagger is an API definition format. Swagger UI is the documentation. And that's why I started doing it. But along the way, I started seeing a lot of other potential. And right along in the same point, the CEO of 3Scale, Steve Wilmot, and I kind of brainstormed a new API discovery format that we called APIs.json. So this was derived out of both of our brainstorming and work I was doing for the White House. If you're not familiar with, the Obama mandated that all federal agencies in the United States go machine readable by default in 2012, and I was part of that program. And we created a standard called data.json. So if you go to whitehouse.gov, NASA, a bunch of them, /data.json, there's a machine-readable index of their enterprise data inventory. And that's what I worked on while I was working in DC. And when I got done, I came out and I created APIs.json. But rather than indexing data, I was indexing APIs. And then I saw the first thing I hung in my index was a Swagger specification. So basically, I would put APIs.json in the root of my domain, and it acted like a sitemap.xml for my APIs. And the first thing I would put in there is a Swagger, and then I would add other things like documentation or pricing or terms of service, really simple things, and just kind of gave my APIs a name, description, and some tags. And then I saw that I could build collections because, using my 3Scale service composition, my API management, I have my internal set of APIs, and then I have my partner set of APIs, and I have my public set of APIs. And so I built 3 separate collections. But then I identified a 4th collection that's really important to me. I use almost 50 public APIs to do what I do. I use Amazon, I use Gmail, I use different APIs. And I built a collection that was really a list of these services that I depend on as an API provider. And this all really started bringing my mess into focus, gave me a map of my infrastructure and what was out there, what I had created. I mean, even though I'm the only developer, I'm talking 5 years of building APIs, I'd created quite a mess. And so Swagger and APIs.json allowed me to start making sense and bringing some order to this world. And then another thing happened along the way, a thing called Docker. And this kind of, set me back. I started thinking differently about how I was going to approach my infrastructure, how this could help me, deal with that, basically the infrastructure failure that I had put out there. And I started thinking about how I could build independent API stacks. Rather than one big, massive stack, I could build independent API stacks and isolate my architecture. So some of you, some people are going to think of this as kind of a microservices approach. It's kind of my bastard version of microservices. I feel microservices are very personal. It depends on the company that's doing them, the person, and what your architectural experience is and how you use them. But here's kind of what I've been working through. So microservices for me, or a micro approach, really is about defining a minimum viable surface area for my API. And Swagger helped me understand that. How many endpoints do I have? How many parameters? How complete are those? How large are the underlying data models? But then I went further. I want minimal on disk, minimal compute, minimal message size, minimal on the network, minimal time to rebuild my APIs, and minimal time to throw them away. Because I like ditching my old legacy architecture. I don't like having old stuff laying around if I can help it. Minimal ownership, minimal dependencies to other services. So all of this allowed me to really think in a kind of micro way of life. And along the way, Swagger started becoming kind of a unique identifier for each of these definitions. Not perfect, but between the host, the base path, and then the path for each API, kind of gives me a fingerprint of each of my API resources. And as I started, hanging these in APIs JSON, working to better understand that, I created a new version of what I, consider my infrastructure. I'm calling it I couldn't take down my old API Evangelist infrastructure. It's still up. I created an entirely new one that I call the Kinlane Master Stack, because honestly, a lot of the work I do is much larger than API Evangelist. I do a lot of other stuff for government, stuff for nonprofits. And so I put it all under the Kinlane brand, which, thank you to Microsoft for my wonderful logo. Who knew what the Kin was, the Microsoft Kin? It was a little cell phone that they launched, a big old program, a piece of shit. But it was created a really cool logo, and thankfully I took it. I offered them $10,000 for the domain, and they wouldn't give it to me. But so under the Kinlane stack, I have over 25 APIs now. But that's really about almost 300 separate endpoints. It's a pretty robust stack. You can go to, just type in Kinlane Master Stack and it'll come up. And you can see all the endpoints. It's pretty robust. But it's still not all unwound yet. It's pretty much just kind of my next generation stack. But along the way, I started decoupling my services. So rather than having one links API that was curated and my link rot, I now have separate ones that are each in their own Docker containers, have their own definition, have their own Swagger, have their own APIs.json. And my links API, my curation, my link rot, my screen capture, those are 4 separate APIs that don't know anything about each other. And when I create a new link, I can then, using a kind of chaining approach, then either take a screenshot and do other things. But they all don't know about each other now. And I did the same for my image services. I have an images system, but really the resize, compression, filtering, all the stuff doesn't know about the other APIs. And what this has done is I'm on the Amazon stack, but then this allowed me to fire up a Docker server in Microsoft and Google infrastructure, Azure, I guess you would say, rather than Microsoft. But now I can fire up the same definitions in each of these 3 infrastructure areas. Now, it's not like I can just drag and drop between each of these infrastructures. I needed a blueprint for the common aspects of all of this. And that's where GitHub comes in. I'm a big user of GitHub. Basically, all my public infrastructure runs on GitHub. I don't have any servers that serve up anything but APIs. All API Evangelists, all my websites run as GitHub pages, and they're very static websites. And then each API, or microservice, or whatever you want to call them, is its own GitHub repo. So I have 25 separate GitHub repos in my stack, and everything lives in the GitHub repo. The APIs.json, its backups, it all lives there. And it allows me to independently manage the blueprint of what is each of my APIs. And the Amazon Docker container takes and uses that as its master blueprint. And when I kill that Docker container in Amazon and delete my Amazon account, I can fire it up in Microsoft, point it to its APIs.json, and it knows everything about itself, knows where its last backup was, knows everything about its infrastructure, and it just can pull it up. I do a DNS switch, and I've got new infrastructure. And the APIs.json is proving to be the center of that world, that kind of manifest for how I know everything about each of my microservices. And I'm actually playing around with different definitions of my services. And I have a Note API that runs in my Amazon cloud, but then I have another version of it that runs on a Raspberry Pi in my house. And so I can create a private notebook as well as my public notebook. And I can keep those in different infrastructure. They live under similar DNS, but all driven by a GitHub repo. And because I use 3Scale for my API management structure, and I wanted to be able to localize my infrastructure like this, all the way from Amazon to Google down to a Raspberry Pi or a local server, I needed to localize my API management infrastructure. So what I did is I took core features of what I use 3Scale for, and I created separate Docker instances for each endpoint. So I have a user endpoint, its own API, and all it's doing is proxying 3Scale infrastructure. And I can create, read, update, and delete users who have access to my APIs using that endpoint. I create an account, so I can create new accounts, I can manage billing, I can do all the things I normally do. Services, you can get a list of all the services and the plans that I offer through this other endpoint. And then applications, you can create new apps, get new keys, reissue keys, and each Docker instance is configured to know how it should get its keys initially, refresh them on a periodic basis, and then for the entire 25 sets of APIs, I have a master key management that allows me to manage and refresh my keys. So I can change them weekly, I can change them quarterly, because as an old IT guy, I'm pretty big on doing that kind of stuff. Ideally, the entire 3Scale API management stack would be all Dockerized, containerized microservices. But those 4 is what I initially did. If you go to the 3Scale API, they have a pretty robust API that you can get at, quite a few endpoints. So now I have the kin lane infrastructure. Now when I'm talking about what I'm going to do for API Evangelist next, I've got a list of 25 APIs. Not all of them apply to API Evangelist. But when I'm talking about API Evangelist v2, what do? I go down all my 25 GitHub repos, and I just fork each one that I want to replicate into my new API Evangelist org. Because I have a kin lane org, all my APIs live there. I just fork them into my API Evangelist org, fire up Docker in Amazon or Google, wherever I want it. I now have a new stack for API Evangelist, totally separate from kin lane. Because I use 3Scale, I'm using the same key. So really my API management infrastructure didn't change at all. But see, along the way, I have people who are using these APIs. And some people really don't care about my full stack APIs. They started using my image resize, my screen capture, the really valuable API resources that I've deployed. And so there's this interest in these utility APIs, and most of them are fine just using my APIs. And but the problem is I'm rapidly changing. Think of me as the Facebook of APIs. I'm constantly breaking shit. And people are like, well, hey, I was trying to run a screen capture job, and your stuff's not working. I'm like, well, I'm sorry, I'm doing things, you know. And they're like, well, how about I get a different version of that? And so now I'm deploying wholesale APIs, as I would call it. Basically, rather than just creating the kin lane stack or the API Evangelist stack, I have partner stacks. and I'm able to sell wholesale versions of my APIs. Still using the same API management infrastructure, but because it's localized, they can register new users, register new accounts and apps and services all through their stack, not through my stack, but it's using the same underlying infrastructure. So now I'm slowly cultivating a new breed of API providers from within my API ecosystem. So they started out as developers or API consumers, and some of them, as they grow and evolve, I'm teaching them to be API providers. And hopefully someday they can be open for business as their own API management or API provider, and I'll give them their own 3-scale keys. Or, in theory, they could swap it out and they could go with Mashape, Kong, another solution. But I haven't gone that far yet. I'm still proving all this out. And so I want to create a new breed of next generation API providers, teaching people that they can do this for themselves. This is where it started shifting for me. And this is where I start focusing on a next generation of an API community, is because I have that APIs.json, and John Musser came to me a couple months ago and said, why don't you set up monitors using API Science for this new Kin Lane stack? And I said, sure. How do I set them up? And he's like, well, you got Swagger specs? And I'm like, yeah. Here's an APIs.json that lists them all. So I got 25 Swagger definitions, all indexed with an APIs.json. And he goes, oh, okay. And he comes back to me about 5 minutes later on chat, and he goes, oh, here's a link to all your monitors. And he set up all my monitors for me by spidering that APIs.json. And I said, okay, cool. And now I have all these monitors, and I get these regular updates on whether my stack is up or down. And so I started working with the similar approach using RunScope. Oops, I got this thing. What am I doing? Hitting the button. And I'm talking to people like SmartBear to do the similar things, each allowing them to use my APIs.json as a doorway for offering me services as an API provider, either via my Kin Lane stack, my API Evangelist, or to any of my partners via their stacks, all through that single APIs.json doorway. And so what happened is, you go to my APIs.json, I have a Swagger definition, and I use that Swagger to create Postman collections. And what did I do? I took those Postman collections, I hung them in my APIs.json. So you can actually get at my Postman collections. They don't have any keys in them. You'd have to get your own keys. I'm actually publishing them now with a public set of keys, so you can't actually run them out of the box. But and I change, because I have such efficient key management, I can change those each week and refresh them. But this isn't just machine readable. I have all the home pages of my portal all take that APIs.json and build a UI, a really simple JavaScript UI that runs on GitHub and allows you to browse those APIs. And then, there's companies like APIs.io that'll hit that APIs.json and index it and provide a search for my APIs. WSO2 in the next release will publish APIs.json by default, so they can register with APIs.io and then also take advantage of this emerging service ecosystem. I'm building other independent services, like you can plug in your APIs.json into that URL right there, and it'll generate 7 code libraries, SDKs, for you out of the box. I also started hanging those code libraries in the APIs.json as well. But what happened is, now I have these inbound services where companies like API Science can come and index my APIs.json, grab the Swagger or the Postman. I'm adding API Blueprint as well, so they can choose which format they like, and run and return a set of services for me. And then, so what did I do with the thing that John Musser gave me? I added it. So now I have an XAPI Science, which is a link to a JSON definition of the weekly monitors and the data around my availability of my APIs. What happens next? Well, other providers can come along, and now that I have a Swagger, a Postman, and an API Science, companies like API Changelog can come along and grab any of that data that they choose and generate the services that they use. API Changelog keeps a track of which services are up and down and the availability of documentation and other building blocks of APIs, and then he can come back and hang his own definition of API Changelog in my index as well, providing it to other providers. So now people can start searching against my APIs, not just based upon tags and keywords and descriptions, but they can also come along and search based upon the Swagger API interface, the availability of that API, the up and down, the changes. So they can look at much, much more than just the metadata around an API. And of course, he can hang his own definition in there as well, adding to my stack. So this really creates a whole new potential community kind of life cycle around delivering API services. So I was talking to other people here. I won't mention names because I don't see him here. But, oh, there he is. But security services, other tools, that performance. So we really, when you talk about who can come and provide this level of services, not just about API consumers coming and using your API. It's about people coming and offering testing, monitoring, other discovery and search, performance, proxying, caching, basically this whole stack of services that are already being developed against Swagger and API Blueprint, but stepping back and using API's JSON as that doorway to get at those API, to index and get at those definitions. So really, this demonstrates for me the potential of APIs.json as a discovery format, but not discovery in the sense that you would think of a hypermedia where I can provide a link to the basic discovery of hypermedia, but this is about going beyond the technical discovery of an API. It's about understanding the business of your API, the availability, the monitoring, the pricing. And then it goes even further because one of the first machine readable formats we launched with APIs.json was what we call API Commons, which was derived out of my work on the Oracle versus Google case for the Electronic Frontier Foundation. So if you're not familiar with the Java API case, Oracle sued Google over the Java API trying to copyright the Java API, which sets a pretty bad precedent for API design. And when we can lock up not just APIs and the code behind, but also the definition itself. If you think of what this would have done to Amazon's APIs if they had copyrighted their APIs, it's pretty damaging. So I worked with the EFF to fight this case, and we're still in the process, honestly. It's not over. And so you can hang your copyright, and not just the copyright of your API, but the licensing of your code behind your SDKs in your APIs.json. So now I can search for APIs, understand the metadata, the surface area, I can understand pricing, I can understand uptime and availability, I can understand licensing. So I can search for APIs that have SDKs that are open source. And so really it transcends technical API discovery and goes into the business and political area. And it really helps us in understanding how we can use APIs for websites, for mobile, for single-page apps, and then ultimately the Internet of Things. And that's pretty much my story on my API stack. You even have to flash the whole 3-minute, 5-minute.
No, we had.
You just let me go because I'm the last one.
No, it's just that we don't want to stop the event. We don't want to stop you, right? It's fine. It's fine. No problem. So a few questions maybe
Sure.
for Ken, or just maybe an open discussions. We have a lot of drinks. It's still some food, so we have time. We have time.
Is the beer cold yet out there?
So maybe I will open. I will open it. So you just you were saying that you've built all your stack, your personal stack and API Evangelist stack. I would say, where was the theory? We receive a lot of people that talk about, and we had some today that talk about the theory of how you should build stuff or design stuff or everything. And it seems that you've built it from what you needed. And you face problems, you face them, you solve them, and you continue like that. So what is the place of theory in the API lifecycle at your?
So this is what I've done for the last. If you go to my site and what I've looked at for didn't have this prepared, but after studying APIs, I've looked at all the APIs in programmable web and studied how they do what they do. And I have what I consider my building block philosophy based upon what Twilio does, what Amazon does, what Google. And you can look at all the building blocks of what you could have as part of your API operations. And so everything from authentication to code management. And so basically I've took the best practices of the best APIs out there and I created one blueprint. And then this is what I do for companies, how I make my money is I consult and help them use this model to improve their API operations. And then, I've tried, my APIs still suck, as far as what I do. But, so I've created my own portal based upon that building block philosophy. And this is a demo that'll actually walk you through what all the elements are. But let me just cancel out of that. But if you look at it, this has all of the elements of what I would consider a good API portal. Getting started authentication, code, pricing, rate limits. You should have a communication, support, roadmap, all the terms of service. And if you look at this, this is actually driven by an APIs.json. That UI uses the APIs.json to generate each of those links. And so this has given me a model based upon the best practices out there to follow for myself. And using APIs.json, I'm just trying to extend that to you to help people understand how to pick and choose which building blocks they should use for their own, and then provide an index of that entire operational picture. That's where I derived that from.
Okay, so you've tried and failed and failed and tried, and at one point you understood something, and it's mostly API JSON, and now this is the pattern. Like, yep. Little like I was discussing with Christian Fauré, which is a philosopher and IT architect. He said that the same about Roy Fielding. He said in 1993 he was in a team, like he was working on the web and everything, but it's only 8 years after he understood all the thing and he made this theory at the end. So APIs JSON is the rest of his time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, sorry, it's little.
I wouldn't own that one, but yeah,
okay.
It's you can go and find, I have a Kinlane, I think it's API stack, but I have, all the APIs out there. Yeah, that's not it. You'd think I would know where my own infrastructure is, but here it is. So you can come here to the API stack and look under, there's a folder, and some people use this, and all the APIs I track on are here, and I've hand created, so you can come down to Twitter and click into Twitter, and there's an APIs.json, and then there's a Swagger definition for, so the APIs.json lists, all the aspects of where the code libraries are. So this is the directory I've created for myself, mapping out the API space. So that map that I created for my infrastructure is based upon what I've been mapping out for the last 5 years, trying to understand the space. I don't index APIs, I leave that to programmable web, but I want to index the API operations and understand how they work. So I've created about 700 or 800 of the APIs that I care about and created APIs.json. I'm handcrafting Swagger for them to better understand that. And then I'm also going through their business models, their terms of service, and creating this. And the goal is some of these providers will go, hey, that's pretty cool, and take the APIs.json. Fitbit's taken it and brought it into their ecosystem. Some of the US government has done that. And so the goal is to get everyone creating APIs.json and maintaining this on their own. But no one knows what it is and no one understands, so I'm doing the work ahead. And this is what is the seed for APIs.io. So one of the first tools that 3Scale and I created off of all of that work was this. So when you search for, Twitter here, what shows in the what shows here, these are APIs. These tags are from the APIs.json. So all these elements here, they don't show all of the properties, but the sign up, the Swagger, the blog, these are all. This is all APIs JSON driven. So all you got to do to get in here is create an APIs.json and submit it, and you'll be indexed in the search engine. And that stack that I created trying to understand the space was the birth of this.
We have time for one question again.
No.
Yeah, one here. Always one question.
Yeah, always.
It looks like you are collecting tons of data and that your websites are like a great archives for all of this. But do you have like some kind of dashboard that lets you like at a glance view what's happening daily? Your own business intelligence app or whatever? Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you show it
I'm not
to
going
us?
to show you
No?
because it looks like crap. But yeah, I can show you the API infrastructure. I mean, my master stack. So if you, the documentation will take a second to load here because it's so many endpoints. Like I said, it's 300 endpoints. And so I'm actually going through APIs.json and rendering JavaScript here, so it takes a second to render. I'm working on that caching and performance. But so I have a dashboard. This is how I understand the space. So if you read anything on my blog, you know, I look at 3,000 companies. There's only about 1,500 to 2,000 APIs that I care about, that I think are worthy. And then for those APIs, I've gone through and grabbed their GitHub URL, their Twitter, their blog, RSS. And those are the three most important signals that I use. And so in the APIs.json, you know, programmatically pulling RSS feeds, programmatically pulling tweets, followers, and then pulling GitHub repos, GitHub commits, GitHub followers. Those are all the most important signals that I track on to go, who's doing things in the API space. And I can tell you companies that are going to go away pretty quick because they come out and for 6 months there's a lot of activity and all of a sudden flat lines and they run out of money. And I can tell you this company's about to go away, even though you go to their portal and they look like they're totally alive, but I could say no, they're gone. And then so they float down on my monitoring. And so I have dashboards that I use that use my APIs that I've created. It's a very, I wouldn't say clunky, but it's a very scrappy, hacky kind of interface that gives me exactly what I need to do what I do as the API evangelist. And so eventually I'm going to extend that to the API, and I'm providing that to other providers. You know, I'm working with Mark to do things. I'm working with API Handyman, other people to create weekly updates and create real-time dashboards off that data. I really don't want to own that next generation. I want other people to do it and just use my APIs. And so I'm going to get better at that. For now, it's pretty much just been my little baby and what I look at to understand the space. So. Uh-oh.
I can't let you go without a question. You know that.
I know.
Couple of questions I have. One is, so the APIs are generally driven by the mobility movement to begin with, and then that's why it became popular, hand in hand, both of them. But the IoT is trying to get there now. Still, it's in their own mess of very tightly connected with the backend systems and all that. So have you seen companies using APIs to drive IoT either now or in the near future? And second part of my question is, you and I discussed a lot about API security and privacy and other issues in past 2 panels and conferences, but you seem talking about it. What happened? Did somebody talk to you about it?
Yeah, so the first question, IoT. So I have a version of the portal that's an IoT version of it. I'm working with Mark to create a city government version of it. The IoT version, unfortunately, was funded by a company called GigaOM. If you heard about GigaOM, they kind of crashed and burned. And so I'm picking up those pieces, and I'll keep moving it forward. But I'm working with providers like F5 Networks, who does wireless routers, so basically like Linksys or Belkin. And they're building wireless routers with Docker stacks on them. And so working on concepts like, your wireless router comes with a portal. So this rendered, but it's kind of like, so there's all my endpoints that run my stack. Keep going down, and there's a whole endless list of them. But so think of your Linksys router when you plug in your router, that it has that local host default page. The API's JSON-driven default page now. And when you bring home that new drone and you fire it up, it's trained to, put a local stack of APIs in your wireless router, register itself in your APIs.json. When you buy the Philips Hue lighting, when you buy all those home automation. So basically your home router can become basically a local server, And then it has a local discovery service that's APIs.json. Everything registers itself there. Potentially, not all providers are going to get on board, but really with IoT, where I'm at now is just educating, doing what I've been doing for the last 5 years with regular API providers and helping IoT providers understand that, hey, you should have REST APIs, not SDK, just SDKs. Yes, have SDKs, but show the underlying pipes, have documentation, have these common building blocks, learn from what we've done in the API or the web and mobile space, and extend that education to the world of IoT. So I'm right there. I don't have enough time and energy, or I'm trying to do it. I just don't know if I need an IoT evangelist. If anybody wants to be an IoT evangelist, I'd definitely bring you the work and get you out there. But so I'm working on that. Single page apps is another area that I would like to be able to people to fire up and have them register so you can index single page apps. WSO2 is doing the whole internal enterprise, being able to create an internal search engine, an internal registry. So yeah, it's just, I'm one guy and I'm independent, so there's only so much I can do. The politics of this, I'm working on things not so your terms of service are machine readable, but I have a API's JSON format that, because I track on whether I can delete my, whether a company has an API, whether that API is self-service, whether I can delete my account. So I have a whole stack of things that I'm tracking on companies, and I'm actually starting to go after companies like WhatsApp, Snapchat, who have APIs and they're public, but they don't have a public API program. And so I'm starting to harass them more and actually go, hey, you should have a proper API management program. You should have these things. And then I'm also going around and educating users that they should only use services that have answered these questions. We shouldn't use services that don't have APIs, that have data portability, that allow me to delete my account, that allow me to own my data. And so that's a whole APIactivist.org, I guess, or something like that, But again, I don't have enough time to do all that. But
how much do you spend in domain names?
Actually, yeah, I'm in rehab. I only own like 10 domains, where I used to own like 200. But yeah, I went through rehab and I'm better now.
I think we can wrap up on there. Thank you very much, Ken.
Thank you.